The Polish political class is at war with itself. The president and the prime minister are at daggers drawn. Let's find out why this is interference. It's the Christmas special, and we're taking it to Poland, to Warsaw, where we have today our special guest. His name is Krysztof Mularczyk, and he is the Brussels Signal Poland correspondent. Hi there, Chris.
Hello, welcome viewers, happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too, sir. And as always, we have Alex joining us from the good old UK. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
Right. Down to business. What's going on in Poland, Chris? The stories we read from you suggest that not only do the president and the prime minister, Mr. Nawrocki and Mr. Tusk, not get along personally. They're from different parties, of course, but they seems to be going a lot further than that. They seem to hate each other and are trying as much as they can to cut each other's legs off. Is that a fair description?
Yes, it's a reasonable description. We're talking about two alpha males struggling for power now. The two alpha males that used to struggle for power in Poland were Donald Tusk and Jarosław Kaczyński, the leader of the Conservatives, the PIS. Now it's Nawrocki versus Tusk. Because the new president has made it absolutely clear that he wants to fulfill the mandate on which he was elected on. In other words, the platform that he was elected on. And he will not back down from vetoing legislation that he doesn't like, from not signing nominations of candidates put forward by the government that he doesn't like, nor accepting government policies silently that he doesn't like. And of course, Mr. Tusk, who is definitely an alpha male on his government side, and who has over the last few months very successfully stemmed any opposition within the ruling coalition to his rule. He, of course, is now at a point of confronting the president and making that the new division line in Polish politics. It's the government versus the president.
When you say alpha male, that just reminds me, weren't they both boxers or football hooligans or something? They had a checkered past, right? Both of them, is that right?
Well, Nawrocki really is a heavyweight. He's a heavyweight boxer. He was an amateur champion of the Gdańsk region. So he has a strong background in fighting. Tusk was never a boxer. He was simply a football fan in his youth, and he still likes to play soccer, obviously at a very, very amateur level. So but he's a fighter in terms of his political nature. He's not one to back down. He's not one to compromise. And I think in Nawrocki, he's got exactly the same kind of opponent against him. And also an opponent who is much younger than Mr. Tusk. You see, again, when looking and comparing Tusk to Kaczyński, the leader of the PIS, it's Tusk who seems to be a lot younger. He's only actually 8 years younger, but he seems a lot younger than Kaczyński. But compared with Nawrocki, well, Tusk is an old man. Nawrocki is only 43. Tusk is 68. So biology, I think,
very young.
Play a role here.
Very, very young. And what's the main issue here, Chris? I mean, we hear a lot about pro-European and anti-European. Is that the main issue or not?
That's one of the issues. Certainly, the question of sovereignty of Poland really making its own ground in Europe and having its own say and being able to make decisions on its own. Mr. Tusk seems to think that Poland can simply go into the European mainstream and negotiate the best possible position for it. Nawrocki and the PIS believe something different, that Poland has to reassert its sovereignty, that Poland is now a strong country, a strong economy, and has the same rights as Germany and France. It's not a junior partner to Germany and France anymore. That's the way that the PIS pitch it. Now, so that issue is important. However, there are also other issues which are important to do with identity issues, cultural issues, with obviously the Liberal coalition being prepared to try and introduce liberalizing measures on abortion, LGBT, uh, to try and change society so that it is much more like the European mainstream. Whereas, of course, Nawrocki and PIS oppose this. But of course, there's another issue as well, and that what's happening on the Polish right. The Polish right used to be dominated by PIS. Back in 2019, of the 51% who voted for right-wing parties, 43% voted for PIS, and PIS had an overall majority. Today, the PIS has barely 30% in opinion polls, and other right-wing parties have over 20% in the opinion polls. So that has changed the political dynamic. But Nawrocki is popular with all shades of right-wing opinion. And that's the big difference. He is the only guy who can unite the right. Kaczynski, I think, cannot do that. I think he finds that very, very difficult to accept. But that is the stark reality of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? It's almost like the EU is the dirty mistress in all of these relationships breaking down across Europe. And it's interesting to also see that Poland, in some respects, is a country that certainly in Britain we look to and think that they've got a lot of stuff fairly right in recent years when it comes to managing borders better than their Western counterparts. And yet here we are, Poland is trying to fog march itself down the sort of liberal routes to dystopia, just as other countries are looking at Poland saying, you chose the right direction. Please don't succumb to all of this. But also at the same time, it's interesting to see the EU becoming the schism in Polish politics, when actually, if you look at a success story, and this is coming from a Brexiteer, when you look at a success story of EU membership, you could hold Poland up as it is the country that has benefited a lot as a net benefactor of EU structural funding. It benefited a lot from open borders because it saw a lot of people leave, make a lot of money in other countries and return. There may have been a temporary brain drain, but now it actually has managed to grow its economy and become a sort of bigger player in the EU. It's interesting, it's now finding the headaches that some of its counterparts like Britain had to once face, which is standing up for its own sovereignty, standing up for its values against the muscular behemoth that resides in Brussels. So it's interesting to see as a Brit, because very often when we were members of the EU, we found ourselves shoulder to shoulder with Poland, fighting against some of the more sort of liberal social policies that the EU's minded to try and foist upon its member states. It's interesting from the outside looking in, watching this struggle now grip the nation.
No, absolutely. And of course, even the Polish liberals are to the right of the European establishment. For instance, the Tusk government is pretty strict on migration issues. It's also pretty skeptical on something like the Green Deal. But Mr. Tusk thinks that he can get the European mainstream more to his way of thinking, or to at least reduce the pace at which these changes are proceeding. And of course, the PIS rather doubts that. Then, of course, there's the issue of the fact that the European mainstream attempted, and you could say succeeded, in bringing down the last PIS government by blocking EU funding. Of course, Mr. Tusk accepted that. And the EU establishment unlocked those funds immediately on him coming to office, even though nothing in real terms changed in terms of, for instance, the issue of the rule of law, an issue which Polish society finds puzzling and difficult to understand. And I think the European establishment also finds difficult to understand. And it just accepts that Mr. Tusk equals rule of law, and the opposition right wing is not the rule of law. When, of course, in fact, it's a much more complex situation, because both sides are actually trying to vie for power and to have power over the judiciary. And really, Brussels should be keeping out of the whole damn thing. And if it did keep out of the whole damn thing, it might actually get settled. Because it's constant interference by European courts and also the European Commission, which is causing the problem. Because if you're on one side, if you're with one side, with Tusk, and totally against the other, without any real substantive arguments for what you're doing, well, you cause more conflict within the country. And of course, a lot of Poles think that that some parts of the European establishment are deliberately trying to weaken Poland because it's not to the liking of Germany and France that Poland is rising so fast as an economic and military power. And there could be something in that.
And what about the argument you just made that Brussels brought down the last Conservative government? Is that considered to be the case among the majority of Poles or not?
Well, not the majority. No, Poland is split right down the middle. Because at the moment it looks as if the right-wing parties have, let's say 51, maybe 52% of the vote. But it's often it was the other way, that the Liberal parties had 51 or 52% of the vote. So we're talking about a split right down the middle. And this is evident on cultural issues and is evident on Europe. It's not evident on the economy really so much, because here the divisions are within these blocks. You have, for instance, the left party within Tusk's bloc, which is of course very statist on the economy, and on the other hand, the PIS is also fairly protectionist and statist on the economy, whereas the Confederation parties are not. So on the economy, it's not the major kind of defining issue in Polish politics at all, and hasn't been for very many years. Maybe that's predictable given there's economic growth, so there's not that much to argue about.
And that also includes the Ukraine war, right? If I'm not mistaken, there is no division among the left and the right on Ukraine, or is there?
There is a bit of a division now, because part of the right, Grzegorz Braun and his far-right party, the Confederation of the Polish Crown, is openly anti-Ukrainian. It also happens to be anti-Semitic, which causes a huge problem, because a future right-wing coalition may have problems with the United States over this if Brown has too big a role within it. But yes, on the Ukraine, the PIS tends to really agree with Tusk on this. Though Nawrocki, interestingly enough, has set out a course of saying that Ukraine has been taking Poland for granted, which is something that has been said a lot by Poles. When they see the fact that after all the military assistance given, after all the humanitarian assistance given, with millions of refugees having come to Poland from Ukraine, that after all that, you have a situation where Ukraine doesn't want to tackle the issue of history and the fact that, of course, it was responsible for genocide on Poles during the Second World War. And it also seems very happy at excluding Poland from the peace negotiations, which are at the moment really being conducted between the French, Germans and the British with Ukraine, and the United States on the other hand, in terms of preparing the negotiating position with Russia. And Poland seems to be excluded. Well, if Poland wanted to exclude itself from everything and just said, well, we don't really want to run the airport hub down in the southeast of Poland. We want to repair the railway lines. We're not interested anymore. But of course, that would be very, very difficult for Ukraine. Of course, Poland isn't going to do that, because that's not in its interests either. Most Poles, and certainly most of the political establishment, feel that an independent Ukraine, a Ukraine that isn't totally under Russian control, is definitely in Poland's interests. Therefore, Poland will continue to help Ukraine. But there is some bad blood at the moment. Plus also the simple fact that if you have millions of new Ukrainians coming into Poland over the last few years, that also is bound to create some tensions. And it is causing some tensions. At the start of the whole process, Poland was very generous to Ukrainians coming here, giving them the rights of employment, social security, education, health, and so on. Those rights are now being slowly pegged back on. For instance, you only get child benefit if you're actually working. There's also some restrictions on the healthcare side, because it turned out that the Ukrainians were getting priority in Polish healthcare. And of course, there are shortages in the health system in Poland, as there are in many other countries. And as in Britain, I'm sure everyone understands that one. So you have a situation where there is some tension that has developed between Poles and Ukrainians, and the Polish right is no longer prepared to be silent about that. It can't be silent about that, or it would lose the support of those people. And even the liberals have, on the quiet, also agreed and unlimited the rights of Ukrainians. They accepted that. So there is an emerging consensus that though the Ukrainians may be welcome here, nevertheless, you have to watch the costs, and you have to make sure that you're being fair to the domestic population and not just to the Ukrainians.
What about when it comes to border immigration issues? Because certainly from the British perspective, when we look at Poland, what we see is a robust defence of borders, a robust defence of culture, making Poland an attractive country for us to try and emulate. Are there border discussions beyond the Ukrainian narrative?
Well, on the Ukraine, yes. I mean, the border issue, there is general political agreement now that there has to be a strong border. With Belarus, for instance, where there was this attempt to send in a lot of illegal migrants. That happened in 2021. And at that time, interestingly enough, of course, the Tusk liberal opposition was saying that that the then PIS government was treating people inhumanely, that it was all an abuse of human rights. Of course, they changed 180 degrees the moment they got into power, and were totally in favor of maintaining a strong border, saying that it's hybrid warfare, that we can't possibly back down to Putin and Lukashenko, and so on. So now there is great consensus on that Poland doesn't want illegal migration coming in from the east. There's a more tricky issue with regard to the EU migration pact, which Mr. Tusk has claimed that Poland is now exempt from. Of course, that isn't exactly right. All that Poland gets is the fact that every year it can apply to the European Commission to be excused having to make any payments or to take in any migrants, any illegal migrants that are being redistributed, if it has a difficult situation with migration itself. But it's not one of the beneficiary countries of the Migration Pact. There are only, I think, 4 of those. That's Italy, Spain, Greece, and Cyprus, if I recall. And they are the countries that are totally exempt. They always get solidarity, either in the form of finance or in the form of them being able to send their illegal migrants to somewhere else. Poland is not in that position. So that, in a way, was a defeat for Poland, because Poland, let's face it, if the war was to get worse in the east and the Ukrainians started to lose that war, there'd be a mass exodus, another mass exodus from Ukraine. And guess where they'd go? Well, not into outer space, they'd be in Poland. They'd have to go to Poland, most of them. So Poland would bear the brunt. Similarly, if there was a crisis in Belarus, where would the Belarusians go? Well, they'd go into Poland. So Poland would have to handle those migration crises. So why aren't they a beneficiary country of the Migration Pact? Hard to understand.
Isn't it the case, Chris, that there has been another wave recently in that the young Ukrainians were being prohibited from leaving the country, but now they can leave, correct?
Yes, we reckon it's about 100,000 people who've come in since August, I think it is. And yes, it's mostly young men who want to avoid the draft, who don't want to fight. So yes, there is continuing pressure. It's not as big as it was, obviously, in 2022, when millions fled in panic, expecting that Ukraine would be run over by Russia. It's not of day. It's nowhere near that scale, but nevertheless, it's a continuing flow into Poland. Now, of course, some Ukrainians have gone further west into Germany and other West European countries where they get better employment or better conditions, whatever. But nevertheless, there are still Ukrainians coming into Poland rather than Ukrainians going back to Ukraine.
And on the war, Poland is not one of these coalition of the willing countries. Am I right in that?
Oh, no. It is a coalition of the willing country, but it's not willing to put boots on the ground, and has said very firmly, both the president and the present government have said that Poland will not put boots on the ground. It's prepared to act as a hub for military and humanitarian aid and help the Western countries that may wish to be part of a peacekeeping force, but it will not take part as peacekeepers itself. Partly that's because of historic problems, in that there'd be tensions. Some people would say, oh, look, Poland is trying to recapture the territory it once had in Western Ukraine. Certainly Russian propaganda has played that game for many years. Oh, look, the Poles are going to try and capture the territories that they lost after the Second World War. So Poland doesn't want to get drawn into this conflict in terms of having its military on the ground. Also, frankly, the issue that I raised earlier, a lot of Poles now feel that Ukraine has not been a terribly loyal ally, and it's not been terribly grateful for the help that it's been getting, that it seems to take Poland for granted. A lot of people think that on both sides of the political fence, and that, I think, is another reason that we don't really want to be drawn into this. If we can possibly help it, we want Ukraine to survive, but we're not going to get caught up in the whole mess.
Because, of course, if the Ukrainian army does collapse, well, that'll mean what? More Russian troops on the Polish border? I'm just speculating.
Well, of course, and that's why Poland doesn't want that scenario either. It already has a very small border with Russia in Kaliningrad, and another potential border with Belarus, really, where Russian troops are, of course, stationed in Belarus. Over 100,000, I think. So it already has Russian troops on its borders, really. But to have even more, obviously not something Poland wants. Poland's really the position for Poland, which I think the president holds, is that the best solution is, of course, Ukraine, as it once was, a buffer state, as a country which is independent, fully independent, strong enough to survive on our borders. But interestingly enough, opinion has changed about Ukraine becoming a member of the European Union. Now, the PIS used to strongly support that Ukraine should become a member of the European Union. It no longer does. The whole of the Polish right now thinks it's not in Poland's interest for Ukraine to become a part of the European Union. And all kinds of conditions are therefore being applied. Oh, you must accept fully the things that were wrong in your history. Oh, you can't have your agriculture coming in and with your products here, and so forth. So that position really has changed very, very strongly over the last few years.
Could we now see a shift in Poland as a result of these arguments, moving away from the EU? Is that possible, or is the majority of Poles still very much in support of the EU, given some of the benefits Poland is harvested?
Yeah, interesting you say that, of course, because it used to be the case that over 90% of Polish public opinion was in favor of Poland remaining in the European Union. Now, that has changed a lot. That's now only 69%, the last poll that I saw. And the number of people who are now opposed and who want to withdraw is 25%, which, according to a particular multi-European survey, was the second highest after France. France was on 27%, Poland on 25%. So there is now a segment of political opinion which is getting tired of the European Union, that even though most Poles still see the benefits of Poland remaining inside the European Union, mainly economic benefits, and also in terms of free travel, freedom of movement, and so forth, they do see the disbenefits, such as the Green Deal, the migration issues, the constant interference by Brussels in Polish affairs, even trying to interfere now in terms of family law, what kind of law we have on LGBT and abortion issues. So a lot of people now are becoming hostile. And of course, the fact that Europe is becoming a dividing line between the right and the center left means that this is likely to grow, that opposition is likely to grow, unless, of course, Poland really is able to become a powerhouse within Europe itself, in that it's now. What could help? Well, certainly, what could help is the natural process of which Poland becomes a net payer into the EU budget. Then the conversation between Poland and Western Europe becomes a little bit different. He who pays the piper calls the tune. So it would become more of a partnership of equals in that regard. Also, if the European Union could turn back towards looking at enlargement of the European Union, which Poland has been supportive, especially in the Balkans, and less concentrated on attempting to forcefully integrate the European Union. I think most Poles would be happier with a slower pace of accession on both sides of the political fence. But I suspect that the real dividing line between the liberals and the conservatives and the right on Europe is only likely to grow. And I don't think Brussels is very likely to step back in the coming years. Unless, of course, a big game changer like a defeat for the centre and the centre left in France takes place. And then, of course, all bets are off, because a government headed by the National Rally might pursue a totally different course. France is much stronger than Italy. Meloni wasn't able to do that. But of course, the French could.
What about the euro, Chris? How is that seen in Poland?
Well, it's almost a non-existent issue in Poland, because no one seems to want to force this. Now, traditionally, the liberals and the left were in favor of it. And the right was skeptical, but saying, well, under certain conditions, we could have it. If there was, for instance, convergence of economies, so that Poland had, say, 80 or 90% of the GDP of Germany, then we could do it. But now I think the consensus is actually keeping your own currency is just good for you, good for your sovereignty, good for your economy, and it just doesn't make sense to give it up. And really, no one is now proposing to give it up. Because there are some liberals and liberal economists who keep arguing that it would be better for Polish competitiveness. But I think at the moment it's a dead issue. I don't think it will figure as an issue in the next parliamentary elections. It certainly didn't figure as an issue in the presidential election.
And why do you think it is actually that Poland hasn't been bombarded by the waves of illegal immigration that other European nation states have?
Well, it in a way it has, because of the crisis on the eastern in Belarus, where they tried to push across illegal migrants who they actually flew in for the purpose. But of course, in terms of scale, that was much less than elsewhere. Remember, Poland does not border any of the areas which are immediately threatened with illegal migration in the same way that Greece, Italy, or Spain are close to those areas, where Poland is not close to the Middle East or to Africa. So that's the reason why. Now, the other reason, of course, why the illegal migrants don't really want to go to Poland, even if they go through Polish territory, they tend to go elsewhere, is, of course, there's no ecosystem here really for them. No large Muslim community. There is, of course, no benefit system that can easily be exploited by migrants from elsewhere. That, I think, is also an explanation of why. Poland has not created an environment, everyone is welcome. It prefers to do it through working visas, where people are given working visas and their families are not let in. And of course, Poland, on its eastern border with Belarus, has actually suspended asylum altogether. And that was done by the Tusk government. To be fair, the Tusk government has been tougher on migration than its predecessor, even tougher. So that, again, is part of the Polish consensus here. It's quite interesting how the United States views Poland at the moment. And it basically, the United States ambassador, Tom Rose, who's arrived in the last few months to take up the post, obviously appointed by Trump, has been trying to get the two sides of Poland's divide to actually agree on some common positions on certain issues. He's not been successful because at the moment the political divisions are too great. But he keeps pointing out that actually Poland is doing the right things, regardless of who's in government, on migration, on the economy, on making sure there's economic growth, and so forth. So America is sending a signal that it would like a calmer political atmosphere in Poland. But at the end of the day, let's make no mistake about it, the Americans will back, the current American administration will back the right. It did so during the presidential election, very, very strongly. It backed Nawrocki. Nawrocki and his team seem to have a strong relationship with the American administration. And I think it was one of the reasons, that strong American support, why Tusk did not try and play it like Romania when the election result in the presidential election went against him. He considered it, and his supporters were trying to make out there had been irregularities, totally unsubstantiated, and of course that the mess with the rule of law meant that the court that was verifying the results and validating it, or that it was really not a court of law in the European sense, and they were trying to make those arguments out. And there was some pressure even on the Speaker of Parliament for Nawrocki not to take the oath of office. But in the end, it got silenced. And I think it's because of American pressure and the Europeans at the time, the European establishment also telling Tusk to cool it, because they were trying to get a better relationship with the Americans. And the last thing they wanted was a huge fight over a key country for the US administration. Because Romania, probably not anywhere near as important to the Americans as Poland is. And therefore, the Romania scenario, fortunately, wasn't ever going to be taking place here.
Okay. Chris, we're running out of time, but there's one final question I have for you. It's Christmas, and one thing we don't know much about Poland, actually, in Western Europe, but one thing that we do know is that, at least for us, Poland is a traditional country, a Catholic country. Now, you mentioned also when we started Brussels' attempts to intervene on issues such as family law gender, this kind of thing. To what extent is Poland still a traditional country, and to what extent does Brussels have support for meddling in these areas?
Well, I think it has support for meddling in these areas, obviously from the liberals and the left, who want to see Poland become less traditional or less Catholic. Church attendances are still slightly above 30%. That's regular Sunday Mass attendance. It's still above 30% in Poland, which is, of course, well down from communist times. But in communist times, the church was really the only opposition. So in an act of defiance, a lot of people who may not feel particularly strongly about religion actually went to church as an act of defiance against the communists. That, of course, has abated, and now it's only people go who actually want to go. But 30% by European standards, anyway, is still pretty high, and the Polish Catholic Church still has a lot of influence, despite some internal problems that it has been having, as many churches have had over the past decades. And of course, the traditions are still strong. It's still, for instance, the majority of the population are still against single-sex marriage. So the traditional view here prevails. Support for abortion, yes, there is support for abortion, but it's not that much bigger than an opposition to it. So again, that's where there's consensus on these issues, or relevant consensus, or consensus in the West. There certainly isn't here in Poland. It's also Christmas really is celebrated very, very strongly, with far more evidence of religious symbols than perhaps there are on Western streets these days. And people really would never even contemplate trying to play down Christmas and play down religious symbolism. Even many of those who are not that strongly religious themselves. So yes, it's still, by European standards, a strongly traditional country.
That's great, Chris. You clearly know what you're talking about. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Alex. And if we don't talk in person, Merry Christmas to you both. Merry Christmas to our
Merry
interference readers and watchers.
Wesołych świąt, as we say in Poland.
Oh, that was Polish. There you go. Well, let's say it again, Chris. How do you say Merry Christmas? Wesołych świąt.
Wesołych świąt.
Bye-bye.